My guys, HKsmash here, talking about Neltharus on the Mythic difficulty. Appreciate the support on the previous video. It seems like you guys are really liking these guides, so we're going to do it short and sweet like we have before. I'm going to take you through the individual fights, let you know what changes for all of these bosses. So for all you visual learners out there, hopefully this video will get you hitting the ground running. I'm going to continue to make these guides for you guys as long as you let me know if you like them. So if you do, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, subscribe for some more WoW content, and of course, come check out the live stream on both Twitch and YouTube. I'm streaming weekly on both of those channels, so you can pick your poison. Let's get things started with Chargath. Fortunately, not much happening here. Only 2 changes to some of his abilities that he had from Heroic. You're going to want to look out for the Grounding Spear and his Fetter abilities. Now, just in case you don't know the fight, essentially, you're going to want to make sure you watch out for the things that are spewing up on the ground. Also, make sure to dance around his Wave ability, which is the Lava Splash. The biggest thing to note with the Grounding Spear is that on the Mythic difficulty, Chargath will throw the Grounding Spear on up to 3 players. What this essentially means is that during the fight, it could potentially hit from 0 to 3. So you're going to want to pay attention to see if you are actually affected by this, because leading into the second ability, Fetter, will actually help you get through this boss much faster if you pay attention. Now, if you're affected by the Grounding Spear, essentially what you want to do is make sure that Chargath goes through the actual trip of the grounding chain. So tanks are going to want to make sure if they need to kite the boss around, you're going to want to do that. Otherwise, DPS, you guys can stay pretty close to the boss. Now, once you trip the boss with 3 Grounding Spears, it's going to stun the boss and he's going to get more damage taken. 50% is a huge increase. So you guys can blow through this boss super fast as long as your DPS is just pumping it out. So you don't need to spread out too much. Just make sure you're pretty close. Make sure you're focusing on getting those Fetter debuffs on the boss. Burn his ass down. Avoid the stuff on the ground. You're good to go. All right, so for the second boss, we've got Forge Master Gorick. Now, just like the previous boss, there's only 2 changes on the Mythic difficulty. His Blazing Aegis ability bounces around to 2 additional players. So healers, you're going to want to stay on top of this because this is more of a heal off than anything. The second ability is his Heated Swings. This is more tank specific, so pay attention. His Heated Swing is a knockback, but on Mythic, it creates Forge Fire. This ability creates a knockback, so tanks are going to want to make sure you're in a good position so you don't get knocked back too far. Unlike myself, I was in a pretty bad spot, and I got knocked behind a table, and I was having a hard time getting away from it. There was a little bit of panic here, but we were able to get through it. Now, outside of the extra abilities, which really doesn't change the fight from the previous difficulties, I think what's important to note is taking care of the other mobs around the boss before you pull. For a few reasons here, if you're not in a good spot, you're going to get knocked into one of those mobs, which actually happened with our healer in this situation. So DPS and healers, make sure you're in a position where you're not too close to the tank so you're not getting pushed back. Because if you do want to skip those mobs, which is totally fine, you might run into a situation where if you're not in a good position, you're going to get knocked into those mobs, and then you're going to have a little bit of extra to party. Now, if you guys can handle it and you want to make things more difficult, interesting, or maybe a little bit more fun like my friends did here, then you could totally go ahead and do it. But ideally, as long as the healers and the DPS aren't too close to the boss in the center of the map, and while you're dodging some of the AoEs that are happening, you're not putting yourself in a position to have to walk into another mob. And if you feel more comfortable just clearing them out anyway, go ahead and do it. It's probably much easier to do it anyway. And on the Mythic Plus difficulty, you're going to want to get your mobs cleared out anyway, so it might be a good idea just to clear them out and then pull. On this fight, just make sure you're in a good position. The rest of the group, make sure you're not out of position. Healers and tanks, manage your cooldowns accordingly. All right, let's talk about Magma Tusk. Magma Tusk is actually pretty similar to the Kokia fight in the Ruby Life Pools, where it's actually pretty important on where you and the rest of the group are positioned because of some of the abilities that were added to the Mythic difficulty. Now, Magma Tusk does get a Lava Empowerment on Mythic. So tanks, you want to make sure you avoid holding the boss on top of any lava strips, because after Magma Tusk does the Blazing Charge ability, it leaves behind the Lava Empowerment on the ground. So it really isn't necessary for the entire group to be so spread out like my group was here, mainly because after the charge, tanks are going to have to run across the floor just to get to the boss, and focusing on removing them from the Blazing Charge empowerment. Because this motherfucker hits really hard if you tank him in the empowerment, okay? The reason why you don't want to be too spread out is you don't want to essentially turn the entire floor into lava. So be mindful of your positioning. You don't have to stack on top of one another. Just be somewhat close. Also, make sure to avoid all the other stuff that pops up on the ground and the waves that come your way, and you're good to go. Pretty easy fight. All right, and for the final boss in Neltharus, we've got Warlord Sarga. This boss in particular has a few different changes. On Mythic difficulty, with the exception of the ad that you get in this fight, the fight doesn't necessarily change that much. Some of the changes in this fight, we have Curse of the Dragon Horde, which I believe is actually a random pickup during the phase where you have to break her shield, or his shield, whatever. So healers, be mindful of this. Somebody could pick this up and they'll be taking a lot of damage, so you're going to have to heal them a little bit more. Those little weapons are scattered around the map, so you can pick them up during that phase. I've been able to get through this fight by picking up a weapon and sometimes not having to, but I think it's best for everyone to pick up a weapon. That's just so you can bring down their shield. You just have to be mindful that at some point somebody's going to get that curse and the healer's going to have to keep them alive. If you want to designate 2 or 3 people to pick up weapons, you can do that too. Now, after you break the shield, the other ability that's added to the Mythic difficulty is the Dragon's Eruption. This actually can be avoided. Just make sure you're a little bit more than 7 yards away. So yes, you can spread out a little bit here. That's not a problem. The other big change on this fight is that there is a add to fight and burn down as quickly as you can. Tanks can help the DPS here if they just so please. Otherwise, all the DPS should shift their focus to the Raging Ember. That magma shell that the Raging Ember has a roughly 225,000 damage that you got to burn through very quickly. So if you have really good DPS tanks, you don't really have to do too much. Just hold the boss in place. I've helped the DPS bring down the Raging Ember, and I've also just kept the boss in place at times, and they both worked fine. Other than that, the fight is pretty much the same. Healers just need to be mindful of that curse because you're going to be healing a little bit more. Plus, if more people pick up more weapons, there's the potential that more folks are going to get this curse. So you're going to be healing a lot more than you need to, which is why it might be best just to designate 2 people to pick up weapons. And that is going to do it for the Neltharus guide. Thank you guys so much for hanging out in today's video. I hope it helps you out. Let me know if it did in the comment section. I'll see you guys in the next video guide.